older friends. It's time for our chapter from Mr. Popper's Penguins. So get a cozy spot and relax, maybe lay down and close your eyes if you want to listen. So you can think of the movie in your head. Today's chapter 16. Remember in chapter 15, Mr. Greenbaum gave Mr. Popper and his penguins a job. They're going to go and perform on all of Mr. Greenbaum's theaters on the stage, and the audience is going to pay them. So Mr. Popper is going to be getting a lot of money to show what his penguins can do. So this chapter, they're getting ready to go to all the different theaters. Chapter 16 is called On the Road. Not by Jack Kerouac. Okay. During the next day, there was much to be done at 432 Proudfoot Avenue. There were new clothes to buy for all of them, and the old ones had to be packed away. And then Mrs. Popper had to scrub and polish and straighten the whole place. She was too much of a good housekeeper to leave anything at 6s and 7s while the Poppers were away. That means not tidy. Mr. Greenbaum sent them their first week's pay in advance. $5,000. That's a lot of money. The first thing they did was to pay off the man who had put in the freezing machine in the basement. Remember, they had to keep the basement cold, so they had to put in a freezing machine so that the penguins would be happy down there. He had been getting rather uneasy about his money, and after all, without him, they could never have trained the penguins. Next, they sent a check to the company who had been shipping the fresh fish all the way from the coast. At last, everything was done, and Mr. Popper turned the key in the door of the little house. They were a little late in arriving to the train station on account of the arrangements, on account of an argument with the traffic policeman. The argument was on account of an accident of two taxi cabs with 4 poppers and 12 penguins, not to mention the 8 suitcases and pails of water and with live fish and with the penguins' lunch. Mr. Popper had found that they could not all fit into one taxicab. So they had to call for 2. Each of the taxicab drivers was eager to be the first to get them to the station and surprise the people by opening the door of their cab and letting out 6 penguins. So they raced each other all the way there. And in the last block, they tried to pass each other, and one of the fenders got torn off. The traffic police officer naturally got very much annoyed. The train was about to pull out of the station when they arrived. Even with both taxicab drivers helping them through the gate and over the rail to the rear observation platform, they barely made it. The penguins were gasping. It had been decided that Mr. Popper should ride in the baggage car with the penguins and keep them from getting nervous, while Mrs. Popper and the children should ride in one of the Pullman cars. That's where people sit, and you can even sleep there too. Because of getting on the observation end of the train, Mr. Popper had to take the birds through the whole length of the train. It was easy enough to get them through the club car, even with the pail of fish he had to carry. In the sleeping cars, however, there were porters were already making up some of the beds. There was some trouble. You see, the porters used ladders to make it easier for people to climb into the top bunk. And this offered too much temptation to the penguins. There were dozens of happy orcs from a dozen ecstatic beaks. Popper's performing penguins, completely forgetting their discipline, fought to climb up the ladder and get into the upper berth. A berth is a bed in a train. Poor Mr. Popper. One old lady screamed that she was going to get off the train, whether it was going 90 miles an hour or not. One gentleman was wearing a clergyman's collar, suggested opening a window so that the penguins could climb out. Two porters, those are the helpers on the train, decided to try to shoo the birds out of the berths. Finally, the conductor and the brakeman with a lantern came to the rescue. It was quiet for a while before Mr. Popper got his pets safely into the baggage car. Mrs. Popper worried a little at the start over the idea of having Janie and Bill miss 10 weeks of school while they were on the road, though the children did not seem to mind. "And you must remember, my love," said Mr. Popper, who had never before been out of Stillwater, in spite of his dreams of distant countries, "that travel is very broadening." So here are the beds in the train. There's a bed on top. It's like bunk beds. And to get up to the top of the bed, you would use a ladder. And so here's one man in the bottom bunk. And here's the other woman in the top bunk. And there's a penguin climbing the ladder. And there's one penguin right there getting into the top bunk. Naughty penguins. From the start, the penguins were a huge success. Even their opening performance in Seattle went off without a hitch, probably because they had already rehearsed on a real stage. It was here that the penguins added a little novelty number of their own to the program. They were the first thing on the bill, which means they were first to go on stage. When they finished their regular act, the audience went wild. They clapped and stomped and roared for more Popper's performing penguins. Janie and Bill helped their father herd the penguins off the stage so that the next act could go on. The next act was a tightrope walker named Monsieur Duval, which is Mr. Duval. The trouble was that instead of watching him from the wings, that's the side of the stage where you can't see, the audience can't see, as they should have done, the penguins got interested and they walked out onto the stage, again to watch him more closely. Unfortunately, at this moment, Monsieur Duval was doing a very difficult dance on the wire overhead. The audience, of course, had thought that the penguins were all through and they were very much pleased to see them again. Here's Mr. Duval up on the wire. Looks like he fell off because the penguins are bothering him. The audience went wild, and the penguins were looking up at Monsieur Duval, dancing so carefully up above them on the high wire. This made everyone laugh so hard that Monsieur Duval lost his balance. "Ork," said the penguins, waddling away hurriedly in order not to be under him when he fell. Cleverly recovering his balance, Monsieur Duval caught the wire by the inside of his elbow and saved himself. He was very angry when he saw that the Popper performing penguins, opening their 12 red beaks as if they were laughing at him. "Go away, you silly birds," he told them in French. "Ork," said the penguins, pretending not to understand and making remarks to each other in penguin language about Mr. Duval. And whenever they appeared, the more they interfered with the other acts on the program, the better the audience liked them. So poor Mr. Duval, who was trying to do his act, and the penguins interrupted him by watching him, and the audience clapped too loud and made him fall off his wire. Oh, naughty penguins. Tomorrow is chapter 17, and it's called Fame. That's when somebody gets famous because they've done something amazing, maybe on TV or in a theater. Well, that'll be a good chapter. I'll see you next time, my friends. Bye.